The Last Wish is a fantasy novel written by Andrzej Sapkowski, and it's also one of the most excellent introductions to a series I've ever had the pleasure of reading. And before I continue, I feel obligated to mention that while I have played The Witcher 3, and I have watched Let's Plays of The Witcher games 1 and 2, I have not read the rest of these books. In fact, this video is going to be the first of a series of book reviews I will be posting as I read the series, and I'm hoping to find that it is as wonderful a journey as the games were. Now, with that said, it is fair to say that I have familiarized myself with the Witcher world through the games, and being familiar with the Witcher world already, I can tell you that this book introduces you to Geralt, his world, and his story almost perfectly. So, before we begin, I'm going to break down why I love this book into 3 parts: Geralt, his world, and Sapkowski's style of writing. No good story can ever be written without a good protagonist. We need someone to follow along, root for, cry for, and cheer for throughout the story. And Geralt, mutant, assassin, sorcerer Geralt, he's that someone for us. Geralt is a witcher, and for those of you unfamiliar with the series, that word may sound a little weird to you. A witcher is a mutant warrior that travels the land searching for monsters to kill, specters to dispel, and at times even curses to lift. Here, the easiest way to get a grasp on the concept is to think of it like this. A witcher is like the male version of a witch. Think widow and widower, witch, witcher. While witches stay in one settlement permanently and solve problems of the more mundane variety with their magical abilities, witchers travel from settle to settlement, solving problems of the much less mundane variety, i.e. monsters, so that the people in those settlements can live their lives in peace and safety. So, Geralt is a witcher, a strong, mutant warrior whose mutations have left him with cat-like eyes and snow-white hair. You'll also quickly notice while reading that Geralt is quite the witty mutant, cracking jokes and solving riddles in equal measure. However, usually these riddles aren't riddles in the traditional sense, but rather riddles that present themselves through the situation the Witcher finds himself in. Here, let me give you an example. In the short story, The Voice of Reason, Geralt demonstrates this trait very clearly, as when confronted by a knight and several accompanying soldiers and guards, the knight, who feels that Geralt has insulted him, challenges Geralt to a duel. However, it's made clear that this will be no real duel. The men threaten the Witcher, stating that if you touch him with your saber during the fight, you mutant, you will be punished. This rather clearly presents a challenge to the Witcher, and this is only exacerbated by the captain of the guards then stating that he always follows his orders to a letter, even if they be as dishonorable as these. So now Geralt is at a crossroads. He's either to allow himself to be beaten and injured by the knight, or is he to beat and injure the knight himself, then be beaten and injured by the accompanying guards. However, with the Witcher's sly cunning quickly at work, Geralt decides to accept the knight's challenge, and the following duel he defeats the knight by striking the knight's own sword with such force that it smacks the knight in the face, crumpling him to the ground. And while at first the accompanying soldiers start to make a move on Geralt, their captain orders them to stop, having noted that Geralt didn't strike the man at all. It was the knight's own sword that struck him. And since the captain always follows his orders to a letter, Geralt gets off scot-free. Genius, as one might say. Geralt is also shown to be quite compassionate, being more knight-errant than Witcher at times. For example, in the short story A Grain of Truth, Geralt, when happening upon some dead travelers, decides to investigate. The investigation eventually leads him to an old, seemingly abandoned homestead. However, the manor is not abandoned, and rather it's inhabited by a man struck with a curse that has transformed him into a beast. Geralt, instead of attacking the monster, as is a Witcher's typical course of action in such a situation, befriends it, as the beast is sentient, and in fact, after doing its fair share of roaring, posing formidably, and threatening Geralt, the cursed man sees that not only did Geralt refuse to strike him down, but also didn't seem scared of him in the least. The cursed man then invites Geralt into the manor. They share drinks, food, and stories over dinner that evening, putting Geralt's sense of dry and at times crude humor on display. Now, the conversation eventually leads the cursed man to reveal something rather dark. his curse has been progressing, and he doesn't really know why. But another thing that he reveals is his relationship with some mysterious female monster. Now, Geralt deduces that it wasn't the cursed man that did the killing, but rather this female companion, which Geralt finds out is a she-vampire. And additionally, that the she-vampire is the one causing the man's night terrors. Then Geralt, heart beating out of his chest, slays the true monster, and the curse is lifted in the process. Now it's actions like these, the cunning deduction, the compassionate understanding to try to lift the curse of a beast instead of killing it, and the dry wit of a funny guy that make Geralt such a great character. And while on one hand he's a brutal, cold-blooded, and inhuman killer, on the other hand he's a compassionate, witty friend who at times acts more human than anyone else in these stories. It's this contrast that forms the truly sensational character that is Geralt. And the reason this works is because, in my reckoning, we too are like Geralt. Real people aren't one-dimensional. We're messy, complicated, often sharing characteristics that almost completely contradict one another. And Geralt is too. He's a flawed, twisted killer on one hand, but he's also brave, compassionate, and human in his own sense. The world of The Witcher is one with the same spirit of our own. And what I mean by that is that everything in this world feels true to life. Everything feels real. The people here are capable of being just as vile, disgusting, and despicable as the people from our own world. Their fairy tales, morals, and religions even closely parallel ours. The landscape itself is even similar to ours, with as many and as beautiful hills, rivers, valleys, and mountains as Earth. The only difference between the Witcher's world and our own are that the things we tell fairy tales about and the superstitions we subscribe to are real here. The world of The Witcher, that is built as if you took human civilization around 1000 AD and dropped all of the fiends, dragons, elves, dwarves, magic, and sorcery from fiction into reality. Everything you know about society in our world can be applied to this world, just with the presence of magic, monsters, and other races besides men added to the mix. For example, one thing that parallels our world is something that's uncomfortable to talk about: racism and tribalism. We know, of course, in our world, that differences tiny and insignificant as the color of your skin or the place you were born can cause heated rivalries, prejudices, and at times even bloodshed. And in the Witcher's world, all these things are true, but rather than being between different quote-unquote races of humans, they're prejudices between completely separate species of humanoids. For an example of this prejudice and bloodshed, in the short story The Edge of the World, Geralt and his companion, the bard Dandelion, are captured by elves, and Sapkowski takes the opportunity to show us how deeply the hatred between these two races goes. After first kicking Geralt, even while bound and defenseless, the elves then jeer and mock Geralt. Cries of "filthy ape-man" and "you reek, human" are shouted out in anger and disgust. Then, steam having been blown off of the elves, Geralt engages them in quite this philosophical conversation, or more of an argument or shouting match, I'd say. This conversation puts on display the rabid and bloody history between elves and humans. All of the past injustices and painful losses suffered by each side by the other are put on display here. And it's shown that for centuries, humans and elves have been battling it out, fighting each other, killing each other, pillaging each other's lands, and slowly the humans have been winning. That's why these elves have been relegated to the edge of the world. This, I believe, is one of the most important things to understand about this world and this franchise, and something that The Last Wish communicates to the reader fluently. The Last Wish starts this message as early as page 1, showing the reader the franchise's main man, Geralt, doing what he loves to do most, in bed with a woman that is described in a way that misled me to believe she was Yennefer. This immediately clues the reader into the fact that the world of The Witcher is a mature, adult world, and that our hero, Geralt, he's an adult too. This is an important step in setting the tone of the novel, as many stories involving monsters, knights, princesses, and wizards are thought of as kiddie novels, the kind you would read to little Timmy as he goes to bed. Sapkowski eliminates any room for error in this first page and sends a message that is clear. The Witcher's world is not for the faint of heart or the innocent of mind. Now, after setting the tone, the next step in world building is exposition. And in my experience, exposition is like Wi-Fi. It's doing its job the best whenever you don't notice it. And once again, Sapkowski delivers on this point. With exposition throughout the novel, whether it be about the various races, kingdoms, or factions of the world, is always woven into the story so that almost nothing is ever directly stated. Now, there is a flip side to this, as it can leave the book feeling a little dry or underdeveloped at times. For example, in the short story The Edge of the World, it's essentially stated several times by Geralt and the other characters that they are, well, at the edge of the world, the edge of human civilization. This fact, however, was not very well fleshed out, and I was left repeatedly wondering things like, why is this the edge of the world? As at this point, another piece of this world has been well established, and that is that humans and human civilization has grown to dominate this planet, the Witcher's planet. Thus, at this point, the readers would assume that there must be a reason that this is the edge of the world. Something must be here that humans haven't already conquered elsewhere. But no, they're simply at the edge of the world. There may be mountains, elves, wildlands, etc., but all these things have been conquered before. Never mind, though. In fact, this is the only time that Sapkowski's world building fell short in my eyes. And this style of writing, this style of not really telling the reader anything, but showing them, is something that I and most people would call
It is a commonly touted point among film critics that you should show, don't tell, when storytelling. This principle is adhered to almost exclusively in The Last Wish, to its benefit and its detriment, although I believe the former far outweighs the latter. Sapkowski's style of writing is most often one that gives you the feeling that you're just another person in the crowd watching these events take place. He doesn't directly state much, ever. The conclusion to the short story that is the book's namesake, The Last Wish, exemplifies this principle perfectly. As Geralt and Yennefer, shall we say, display their affection for each other, Sapkowski doesn't state that the passion they felt was so immense they couldn't help but, well, you know what would come next. This is The Witcher after all. No, instead, Sapkowski does not state their affections or infatuations for each other, and he expresses them in his masterful writing. He interrupted her with a kiss, an embrace, a touch, caresses, and then everything. His whole being, his every thought, his only thought. Everything, everything, everything. I hope that quote is enough to put into perspective what I mean when I say that Sapkowski's style of writing shows me the world, the characters, and how they feel. He didn't tell me that Geralt felt strongly about Yennefer, he showed me through what Geralt did. Sapkowski never writes in a voice that merely tells me what has happened. I'm only ever shown. Perhaps another way to put this is that Sapkowski's writing is very concise. All of the details that are relevant to the plot, characters, and world are clarified, while others are left unsaid. Sapkowski doesn't waste time describing things that don't change the reader's understanding of the story. For example, Geralt's expressions are one thing that is often described, but never unnecessarily. His facial expressions are only ever described whenever Geralt's immediate reaction is relevant to a story or a conversation. Another exemplary expression of this principle is in the sensory descriptions that Sapkowski provides. The descriptions, for example, of the stench of a rotting corpse, or of the scent of Geralt's lover, are given only to enhance the narrative. The stench of a rotting corpse exaggerates Geralt's detachment from death, as while the corpse is retchingly rancid in its description, Geralt's reaction is one of indifference. For another example, when Geralt wakes up from a long sleep, the brightness of the sun is described, not the softness of the pillows he's laying on, or the pain of his recently acquired wound, but the sun is described. This detail is given because it serves Sapkowski's narrative, as Sapkowski quickly leads into how Geralt, although mutated to not having to actually shield his eyes from the sun, still raises his hand in pure force of habit to shield himself from the sun's rays. Sapkowski is only giving details that contribute to, enhance, or support the narrative. Nothing else is given. Now, for example, the narrative here is that Geralt, while physically a mutant, is still deep down a human. And Sapkowski doesn't tell us this, however. In fact, I don't know if this is a line in any of the books, but rather Sapkowski shows us this, and that is achieved through the excellent details and descriptions that Sapkowski provides. And now, on to our conclusion. My last wish for you, dear viewer, is to become a dear reader of Sapkowski's excellent collection of stories and The Witcher's world as a whole. And the last wish is where you should start. It introduces you to all the core parts of the Witcher world. It introduces Geralt, our mutant warrior sorcerer protagonist, wit, wisdom, morals, and all. It introduces you, most importantly for the books, to Sapkowski himself. His style is one that may be a little interpretive, or some would say dry, lacking extravagant detail or flourishing description, only employing such when necessary and doing so to great effect. A style that doesn't hold the reader's hand. The last wish, finally, introduces you to the Witcher's world, the races and their extreme prejudice, the nations, their various laws and cultures, the monsters and their diverse array of horrors, and finally the people, all of their virtues and vices, downfalls and highs. The Last Wish is an excellent book, and even more so when considering that it is the first of this long-running, beloved franchise.